Many women over 50 are doing everything they were told, was healthy eating nuts daily, avoiding junk food, choosing snacks that look clean and natural, and yet their hair keeps thinning quietly strand by strand without a clear reason. What if the problem isn't that you're missing something, but that a few familiar foods are sending mixed signals to your body, helping your hair in one way while sabotaging it in another? I'm Dr. Eliza Hart, a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist with over 15 years of experience working closely with women through hormonal changes, aging, and the quiet frustrations that often come with them, including hair thinning that seems to appear without warning after 50. What many women don't realize is that hair loss at this stage is rarely about one missing vitamin or one bad habit, but about how the body responds to subtle signals over time, especially from foods we consume regularly and believe are harmless or even beneficial. In this video, I want to help you understand how certain nuts can truly support hair health after 50, while others, depending on how often and how much you eat them, may quietly increase shedding without obvious signs at first. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments which country you're watching from, so I can see how far this message is reaching women around the world. And make sure you watch until the end, because I have a small but important insight that often changes how women approach this entirely. Now let's start with the nuts that actually support your hair from the inside. 1. Almonds, biotin, and scalp protection. As we move into the body of this discussion, it's important to start with a nut that many women already eat regularly, often without realizing how closely it connects to what is happening inside the scalp after 50. Almonds are frequently seen as a simple, harmless snack, yet in my clinical experience, they reveal something much deeper about how hair health changes with age. I often meet women who tell me they eat well, avoid processed foods, and still feel confused when their hair becomes finer and more fragile, especially around the temples and crown. When we look more closely, the issue is rarely about effort, but about whether the body is receiving and using the right signals to support the hair follicle. Almonds matter because they provide biotin, a nutrient that plays a central role in the activity of the cells responsible for producing hair. After menopause, absorption efficiency declines, meaning that even a diet that looks nutritionally complete on paper may no longer deliver enough biotin to the follicle itself. When this happens, hair does not suddenly fall out in dramatic clumps, but instead begins to grow more slowly, more thinly, and with less resilience. Over time, this creates the impression that hair is disappearing, when in reality the growth cycle has simply weakened. What makes almonds particularly valuable is their vitamin E content, which supports scalp health in a way many women overlook. The scalp is living tissue, and when oxidative stress increases with age, it becomes a less welcoming environment for strong hair growth. Vitamin E helps protect the delicate structures around the follicle, improving circulation and maintaining a healthier foundation for hair to anchor and grow. In practice, women who include almonds consistently often notice that their hair breaks less easily and feels more substantial even before they see visible regrowth. The key with almonds is not quantity, but regularity. A modest daily portion incorporated naturally into meals or snacks provides a steady nutritional signal without overwhelming digestion or calorie balance. Hair responds slowly, and this is something I always emphasize because real biological change unfolds over weeks and months, not days. When the body senses consistency, the follicle begins to stabilize, and that stability is the first quiet step toward healthier hair. As we continue, it's important to remember that supporting hair growth is not only about feeding the follicle itself, but also about calming the internal conditions that interfere with it, which leads us to another nut that works through a very different yet equally important pathway. 2. Walnuts, inflammation, calm and hair fiber strength. If hair thinning after 50 feels unpredictable, it is often because the problem is not happening at the surface, but quietly beneath it, where low-grade inflammation slowly changes how the scalp behaves. This is one of the most overlooked realities I see in practice, because many women do not feel inflamed in any obvious way, yet their hair tells a very different story. Walnuts become relevant here, not because they promise dramatic regrowth, but because they address the internal environment that determines whether hair can grow at all. In women after menopause, inflammatory signals tend to rise subtly over time, influenced by hormonal shifts, metabolic changes, and even long-standing dietary patterns. When inflammation affects the scalp, blood flow becomes less efficient, nutrients arrive more slowly, and hair follicles begin to struggle even if nutrition appears adequate. I often see women who focus intensely on topical treatments, serums, and shampoos, while the underlying inflammatory state continues unchecked. In those cases, no external product can fully compensate for what is happening internally. Walnuts provide a unique benefit because they are one of the few nuts that contain meaningful amounts of omega-3 fatty acids nutrients known to help calm inflammatory responses throughout the body. When omega-3 intake is low, which is common in older women, the balance shifts toward inflammation and the scalp becomes a less supportive place for consistent hair growth. By reintroducing omega-3s through foods like walnuts, the body begins to soften those signals, allowing circulation and cellular communication around the follicle to improve gradually. Another aspect of walnuts that deserves attention is their copper content, a mineral rarely discussed in everyday conversations about hair. Copper plays a role in maintaining the structure and integrity of the hair fiber itself. While it cannot prevent natural color changes, it does help preserve strength and flexibility, reducing the brittle texture many women notice as they age. In clinical terms, this often translates to hair that tolerates brushing and styling better with less breakage over time. Walnuts are most effective when eaten intentionally rather than casually. Small portions, several times a week, integrated into meals rather than consumed mindlessly, allow their benefits to accumulate without adding unnecessary caloric or inflammatory burden. Over time, women often report that their scalp feels calmer, their hair texture improves, and shedding becomes less alarming. Yet inflammation is only one piece of the puzzle. For many women, hair thinning is closely tied to deeper regulatory systems in the body, especially those governed by hormones, which brings us to the next nut, and a pathway that surprises many women when they first learn about it. 3. Brazil nuts, thyroid signal for hair growth. When hair begins to thin evenly across the scalp, rather than in isolated patches, it often reflects a deeper rhythm in the body that has fallen slightly out of sync, even though nothing feels dramatically wrong on the surface. This pattern is especially common after 50, and it is one of the reasons hair loss can feel so confusing and frustrating for women who otherwise believe they are taking good care of themselves. In many of these cases, the issue is not the hair itself, but the internal system that quietly sets the pace for growth, repair, and renewal throughout the body. That system is the thyroid, a small gland with an outsized influence on energy metabolism and the timing of the hair growth cycle. Beyond regulating metabolism, the thyroid helps coordinate the body's internal clock, influencing how long hair remains in its growth phase and how efficiently follicles recover after shedding. In clinical practice, I frequently see women who describe their hair as dull, lifeless, or shedding more than it used to long before they are ever told that their thyroid may be underperforming. Even subtle changes in thyroid signaling, which often go undetected for years, can slow the transition of hair follicles from their resting phase back into active growth, creating the impression that hair is disappearing without a clear explanation. Brazil nuts play an important role here because they are one of the richest natural sources of selenium, a trace mineral the thyroid depends on to function properly. Selenium is essential for converting thyroid hormones into their active form, allowing them to send clear and consistent signals throughout the body, including to the scalp. When selenium intake is insufficient, thyroid signaling becomes weaker and less efficient, and hair follicles are often among the first tissues to respond by slowing down. What makes this connection especially important is that selenium deficiency rarely causes dramatic or immediate symptoms. Many women feel generally fine, yet notice that their hair sheds more easily, grows more slowly, or loses its vitality over time. In practice, when selenium intake is gently corrected, the first change women often notice is a gradual reduction in daily shedding, followed later by subtle signs of regrowth as the hair cycle begins to stabilize. Because Brazil nuts are so concentrated in selenium, they must be used with care. Just 1 or 2 nuts a day is enough to support thyroid signaling, while excess intake can create new imbalances. When used thoughtfully and consistently, Brazil nuts demonstrate how a small, precise nutritional adjustment can influence hair growth far more deeply than most external treatments ever could. 4. Cashews. Moderate amount zinc for the hair growth cycle. There is a specific pattern of hair thinning I hear women describe repeatedly after 50, where hair does not fall out suddenly, but gradually loses density and volume until everyday styles no longer feel the same. This slow change is easy to overlook at first, which is why it is often connected to a nutrient that quietly regulates the hair growth cycle rather than the scalp surface itself. That nutrient is zinc, and this is where cashews deserve careful, measured attention. Zinc plays a critical role in guiding hair follicles through their natural phases of growth, rest, and renewal. After menopause, the body becomes less efficient at absorbing and utilizing zinc, even when dietary intake appears adequate. In clinical practice, I often see women whose overall nutrition seems balanced, yet their hair follicles behave as though they are under-supported, remaining in a prolonged resting phase. When follicles stay dormant too long, new hair fails to replace what is shed, and overall density slowly declines. When eaten in moderation, cashews provide a gentle, food-based source of zinc that the body can use consistently. They also contain supportive minerals such as magnesium and iron, which help maintain circulation and cellular repair within the scalp. When these systems work together, hair strands are better able to grow thicker and tolerate daily stress from brushing, styling, and environmental exposure. Many women notice that their hair begins to feel stronger and more resilient before they see visible regrowth, which is often the earliest sign that the growth cycle is stabilizing. What makes cashews unique, however, is the narrow line between benefit and interference. In appropriate portions, they support the growth phase of the follicle, but when eaten excessively naturally, occurring compounds can bind minerals and reduce zinc absorption. This is why intention matters more than enthusiasm. A small regular serving supports the follicle without creating imbalance. As zinc levels normalize, the first improvement is usually reduced breakage rather than new growth, which is an essential step in preserving existing hair. Before we continue, I'd like to hear from you. Comment 1. If cashews or nuts are part of your regular routine, or 0, if you usually avoid them. Your response helps reveal patterns many women don't realize they share. Now that you understand how certain nuts can support hair health after 50, it's important to look at the other side of the picture. Some nuts are not harmful by nature, but when eaten too often or in the wrong amounts, they can quietly work against your hair over time. 5. Peanuts. Liver stress and hormonal disruption. What unsettles many women at this stage is not sudden hair loss, but the feeling that something familiar has quietly turned against them, even though their routine has not changed. Peanuts often fall into this category because they are widely seen as harmless, affordable, and easy to include every day. Yet in clinical conversations, they appear far more often than expected when women describe unexplained shedding that does not respond to supplements or topical care. The issue with peanuts is not their nutritional profile in isolation, but the way they interact with the body's detoxification and hormonal systems over time. Peanuts are particularly susceptible to contamination by aflatoxins, compounds produced by certain molds that thrive in warm, humid storage conditions. Even at low levels, repeated exposure can place an additional burden on the liver, an organ that plays a central role in processing hormones, filtering toxins, and regulating nutrient availability. When the liver becomes strained, the effects are rarely dramatic at first, but subtle imbalances begin to ripple outward. For women after 50, this matters because hormone regulation is already more delicate. Estrogen fluctuations, changes in insulin sensitivity, and slower metabolic clearance all place higher demands on the liver's capacity. When that system is under pressure, hormone signaling becomes less stable, and hair follicles are often among the first tissues to reflect the shift. In practice, I see women whose lab results appear acceptable, yet their hair continues to thin because the internal environment supporting growth has become inconsistent. Another factor that often goes unnoticed is low-grade inflammation related to peanut sensitivity. Many women do not experience classic allergic reactions, but instead develop subtle inflammatory responses that persist quietly in the background. Chronic inflammation, even at mild levels, interferes with circulation to the scalp and disrupts the delivery of nutrients needed for consistent hair growth. Over time, this creates a pattern where shedding increases gradually without an obvious trigger. This does not mean peanuts must be eliminated entirely, but it does mean they should be approached with discernment. Frequent daily consumption, especially in the form of peanut butter or processed snacks, increases cumulative exposure and limits the body's ability to recover. Choosing higher quality sources, reducing frequency, and rotating other nut options often leads to noticeable changes in how hair behaves over several months. What becomes clear here is that hair health after 50 is shaped not only by what you add, but also by what quietly taxes the systems meant to protect balance. And as we continue, this same principle appears again in foods that seem celebratory and comforting, yet influence hair through an entirely different metabolic pathway. 6. Sweetened pecans, sugar, insulin, and follicle miniaturization. For many women, the most surprising trigger for increased shedding is not a nutrient deficiency, but a metabolic signal that quietly reshapes how hair follicles behave over time. This is why foods associated with comfort, celebration, or tradition can become unexpectedly relevant when hair begins to thin after 50. Sweetened pecans often sit at the center of this pattern, not because the nut itself is harmful, but because of what is added to it and how frequently it is consumed. The primary concern here is sugar. Candied pecans, pecan pies, and dessert-based snacks introduce repeated blood sugar spikes that place strain on insulin regulation. After menopause, insulin sensitivity naturally declines, even in women who have never struggled with blood sugar issues before. When insulin levels remain elevated more often than the body is designed to handle, hormonal signaling begins to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. One of those shifts involves androgens, hormones present in small amounts in women that can directly influence hair follicles. As insulin resistance develops, androgen activity can become more pronounced at the scalp, particularly around the crown and part line. This process gradually shrinks hair follicles, a phenomenon known as follicle miniaturization, where each new hair grows back finer, shorter, and less pigmented than before. Women often describe this as hair that looks flatter, lacks coverage, or shows more scalp under bright light, even though overall shedding may not feel dramatic. Sweetened pecans contribute further by delivering a high load of omega-6 fats alongside sugar. While omega-6 fats are not inherently harmful, excess intake relative to omega-3s promotes inflammation, which compounds the metabolic stress already present. Inflammation at the scalp reduces circulation efficiency and interferes with the delivery of oxygen and nutrients needed to sustain strong growth cycles. Over time, this combination creates an internal environment where hair struggles to maintain its previous density. The challenge with sweetened pecans is that their impact is delayed. Increased shedding often appears weeks or months after periods of frequent consumption, making the connection easy to miss. Seasonal patterns are common, where women notice changes in hair texture or volume well after holidays or prolonged dietary indulgence. Understanding this connection reframes the issue entirely. Hair thinning is not a punishment for enjoying food, but a signal that metabolic balance has been nudged off course. And as we move forward, this idea of too much of a good thing becomes even more important when we revisit a nut that initially appeared supportive, yet behaves very differently when consumed without restraint. 7. Cashews. Overconsumption. The phytic acid trap. What often complicates hair recovery after 50 is not a lack of effort, but the hidden consequences of consistency applied in the wrong direction. Cashews illustrate this perfectly, because the same food that can support hair growth in moderate amounts may begin to undermine it when consumed too frequently. This reversal is subtle, which is why many women feel confused when hair thinning continues despite what appears to be a healthy routine. The central issue lies in a naturally occurring compound called phytic acid. Found in many nuts and seeds, phytic acid binds to minerals in the digestive tract, particularly zinc, iron, and calcium, preventing them from being fully absorbed. In younger bodies with robust digestion, this effect is often minimal. After 50, however, digestive efficiency declines, stomach acid levels drop, and mineral absorption becomes more fragile. Under these conditions, repeated exposure to phytic acid can quietly tip the balance toward deficiency, even when intake looks sufficient on paper. In practice, I often see women who rely on cashews as a daily snack or staple ingredient, believing they are nourishing their bodies, while lab work or symptoms suggest otherwise. Hair follicles, which are among the most metabolically active structures in the body, are especially sensitive to these shortfalls. When zinc and iron fail to reach the follicle in adequate amounts, the growth cycle slows and follicles may remain stuck in a resting phase longer than intended. Over time, this leads to thinning that feels persistent and resistant to change. Processing further complicates the picture. Cashews are rarely consumed in their simplest form. Many commercially available options are salted, roasted in added oils, or flavored, increasing sodium intake and placing additional strain on circulation and fluid balance. Poor circulation limits the delivery of nutrients to the scalp, while excess sodium may contribute to subtle fluid shifts that affect tissue health. Digestive discomfort, such as bloating or heaviness, is also common and often dismissed, yet it signals reduced nutrient uptake across the board. The pattern that emerges is not dramatic failure, but gradual interference. Hair does not suddenly shed in alarming amounts, but it loses strength, elasticity, and staying power. Women notice more breakage, slower regrowth, and a sense that progress has stalled, even though nothing obvious has changed. This is why restraint matters. Cashews remain valuable when used intentionally, but when enthusiasm replaces balance, their benefits reverse. Hair health after 50 depends as much on protecting absorption as it does on choosing the right foods, and this principle becomes even more critical when we examine the final nut on our list, one whose richness can quietly overwhelm the systems meant to support growth. 8. Macadamia nuts. Omega-6 load and digestive burden. The final nut on this list tends to surprise women the most because it carries an image of luxury, quality, and indulgence that feels far removed from anything harmful. Macadamia nuts are often associated with healthy fats and premium nutrition, yet in clinical patterns they frequently appear when women describe hair that feels heavier at the root, flatter at the crown, and increasingly difficult to maintain with age. The issue here is not toxicity, but excess, and how richness can quietly overwhelm systems that are already working harder after 50. Macadamia nuts are exceptionally high in fat and calories, far more concentrated than most other nuts. While much of this fat is monounsaturated, the sheer density creates a metabolic load that can be difficult for aging digestive systems to handle efficiently. After menopause, fat digestion and bile flow often slow, which means nutrients are absorbed less cleanly and metabolic byproducts linger longer in the body. When digestion becomes strained, the scalp is rarely prioritized, and hair follicles receive fewer resources to sustain strong growth. Another important factor is fatty acid balance. Macadamia nuts contain a very high ratio of omega-6 fatty acids relative to omega-3s. In modern diets already heavy in omega-6 from vegetable oils and processed foods, this imbalance can push the body toward a more inflammatory state. Chronic low-grade inflammation does not announce itself loudly, but it subtly alters circulation and cellular signaling at the scalp, creating conditions where hair growth becomes less efficient and shedding feels more persistent. Digestive tolerance adds another layer. Many women experience bloating heaviness or discomfort after eating macadamia nuts without immediately making the connection. These symptoms reflect reduced digestive efficiency, which affects the absorption of minerals, proteins, and vitamins essential for hair health. When the gut struggles, hair often follows not because of deficiency alone, but because delivery has become unreliable. Portion size is where macadamia nuts quietly become problematic. Their taste and texture make overconsumption easy, and small handfuls quickly turn into large caloric intakes without conscious awareness. Over time, this pattern places stress on weight regulation, insulin balance, and inflammatory pathways, all of which intersect with hair health after 50. What this reveals is not that macadamia nuts are inherently damaging, but that their richness demands restraint. When consumed occasionally and in very small amounts, they may be tolerated, but when eaten regularly, they can tip the internal balance away from the stability hair follicles depend on. This brings us to an important turning point because once the sources of interference are understood, the focus can finally shift toward creating a simple, supportive pattern that allows hair to recover more naturally. 9. How to support hair health safely after 50. Once the sources of support and interference become clear, the focus naturally shifts from restriction to strategy, because hair health after 50 is not restored by eliminating everything familiar, but by creating a pattern the body can actually sustain. Many women feel relief at this point because the solution does not require perfection, only consistency and awareness of how small choices accumulate over time. The first step is reducing background stress on the systems that regulate hair growth, particularly in digestion, liver function, and metabolic balance. This means rotating nuts rather than relying on a single type every day, keeping portions modest and favoring whole, minimally processed forms. When the digestive system is not overwhelmed, nutrient absorption improves and the scalp begins to receive clearer signals that conditions are safe for growth. Hair follicles respond not to intensity but to stability. Equally important is timing and frequency. Consuming supportive nuts several times a week, rather than in large daily quantities, allows the body to benefit without triggering inflammatory or absorptive drawbacks. Spacing intake also prevents mineral competition and reduces the likelihood that one food quietly displaces another nutrient the hair depends on. Over time, this rhythm supports a more balanced growth cycle. Hydration, protein intake, and stress regulation work quietly alongside nutrition, reinforcing the same message to the follicle: resources are available, and the environment is predictable. When these factors align, the earliest changes are often subtle, including less breakage, smoother texture, and a reduction in daily shedding. These signs matter because they indicate that the growth cycle is stabilizing even before visible regrowth appears. It's also important to set realistic expectations. Hair grows slowly, and after 50, that pace may be slower still. Improvements often unfold over several months, not weeks, which is why many women give up just before progress begins. Consistency, not urgency, is what allows follicles to re-enter and maintain the growth phase. What ultimately supports hair health at this stage is not a single food or rule, but a pattern that respects the body's changing needs. When interference is reduced and support is applied thoughtfully, hair is given the opportunity to respond in its own time, setting the stage for strength, resilience, and renewal beyond what quick fixes ever promise. Hair thinning after 50 is not a personal failure, and it is certainly not a sign that your body is giving up. What it reflects is a shift in how your body processes nutrients, regulates hormones, and responds to long-standing habits that once worked but now need gentle adjustment. As we've explored today, even foods that appear healthy on the surface can send very different signals, depending on how often and how much they are consumed. The goal is not to fear food or eliminate everything you enjoy, but to become more intentional. By choosing nuts that support thyroid function, mineral absorption, and inflammation balance, while reducing those that quietly strain digestion or hormone regulation, you create a calmer internal environment where hair follicles can stabilize and recover. Progress at this stage is subtle at first: less breakage, reduced shedding, improved texture. But these are meaningful signs that the growth cycle is finding its rhythm again. If this video helped you see your hair health differently, please know that creating content like this takes time, research, and care. If you'd like to support the channel's continued growth, a small donation is always deeply appreciated and helps keep these educational conversations accessible to women around the world. Please remember to like the video, share it with someone who may need this information, and subscribe to the channel for more evidence-based guidance on senior women's health. Thank you for trusting me with your time today and for being part of a community that believes aging can be informed, empowered, and graceful.